I had been looking forward to this vacation for months. A perfect escape from the mundane routines of life, a chance to finally unwind by the beach, feel the warm sun on my skin, and forget about everything else. My bags were packed, my itinerary set, and my mind already drifting toward the sound of crashing waves. Then, the phone call came. My mother's voice trembled ever so slightly, just enough to make me believe her. "Grandma's sick, sweetheart," she said, pausing as if trying to compose herself. "It's serious. We need you here." The words hit me like a cold wind. My grandmother and I had always been close. The thought of her in pain, struggling, made my stomach twist. There was no hesitation in my response. "Of course," I said. "I'll cancel my trip and come right away." And just like that, my long-awaited vacation vanished. I packed a different bag, one not filled with swimsuits and sunglasses, but with the weight of obligation. As I drove back to my parents' house, my heart was heavy with worry. I arrived to find them acting oddly, normal. Too normal. There were no hushed whispers, no tense faces, no urgent trips to the hospital. My father sat in his usual chair, sipping his evening tea. My mother hummed while setting the table for dinner. Something was wrong. "Where's Grandma?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Oh, she's resting," my mother said, a little too quickly. She had a long day. A strange feeling crawled up my spine. I knew my parents well enough to sense when they were hiding something. It wasn't until later that night, when I overheard them talking in the kitchen, that the truth unraveled before me. "He actually believed it," my father chuckled. "We couldn't let him go on that trip, not after everything." My mother sighed. It was for his own good. My blood ran cold. They had lied to me. Used my love for my grandmother to keep me here. And in that moment, as the betrayal settled deep within me, I made a decision. They thought they had won. But they had no idea what was coming. I rushed to my parents' house that same evening, my heart heavy with worry. The drive felt endless, my thoughts racing through every worst-case scenario. Was she in the hospital? Had she been able to eat? Was she even conscious? When I arrived, I expected an atmosphere of grief, hushed whispers, and worried faces. Instead, I walked into a scene that felt like a cruel joke. My grandmother sat in her favorite chair by the window, a book in her lap and a steaming cup of tea on the table beside her. She looked up at me, blinking in surprise. "Oh. What are you doing here, dear?" she asked. "Perfectly fine." I turned to my parents, confusion turning to anger. My mother at least had the decency to look guilty, while my father cleared his throat and avoided my gaze. "You lied to me," I said, my voice low but sharp. My mother tried to smile, but it wavered under my glare. "We just thought it would be better if you stayed," she said, her tone light, as if it were no big deal. "Better?" My fists clenched at my sides. Better for who? They exchanged a glance, and I knew then that this wasn't just about keeping me home for some family emergency. There was something else, something they weren't telling me. And I was going to find out exactly what it was. The anger burned in my chest like a smoldering fire. I had given up my vacation, my one chance to unwind, all because of a blatant lie. But why? What could possibly be so important that they felt the need to deceive me? I sat across from them in the living room, my arms crossed. "Tell me the truth," I demanded. "Why didn't you want me to leave?" My mother fidgeted with the edge of her sweater while my father let out a sigh. "It's not that we didn't want you to go," he said, his voice measured. "It's just, we thought it would be best if you stayed home this time." I narrowed my eyes. Best for who? Silence. Then, my grandmother, who had been quietly watching the exchange, finally spoke. "You should just tell him," she said, her voice steady but firm. "He deserves to know." I turned to my parents, waiting. My father rubbed his temples, as if the conversation itself was giving him a headache. My mother pursed her lips, clearly reluctant. Fine, she finally admitted. We didn't want you to leave because we made plans. Plans? I repeated. What kind of plans? Another silence. Then my father muttered, we're going on a vacation ourselves. I stared at them, the pieces clicking into place in my mind. The suitcases by the door. The freshly printed tickets on the counter. The sudden insistence that I stay home. They had lied to me, just so they could take my vacation for themselves. And in that moment, I decided. They were going to regret it. I sat there, staring at them, my pulse pounding in my ears. They avoided my gaze, shifting uncomfortably like children caught sneaking cookies before dinner. You're joking, I said, though I knew they weren't. My mother forced a laugh. Sweetheart, don't be so dramatic. We just thought it would be a nice getaway for us. A getaway? I repeated, my voice low with disbelief. So you lied about Grandma being sick just to keep me from going, so you could take my trip instead? My father sighed as if I was the one being unreasonable. We didn't think you'd understand. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh, I understand perfectly. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't even try to make them feel guilty, because clearly, they weren't. No, if they wanted my vacation so badly, I'd let them have it. But when they came back, they'd find out just how much I understood. Fine, I said suddenly, standing up. My mother blinked. Fine? Yeah. Fine. Go ahead. Take the vacation. Enjoy yourselves. They exchanged glances, clearly not expecting me to give in so easily. That's very mature of you, my father said hesitantly. I smiled. Of course. You two deserve it. And with that, I walked out of the room, already forming the perfect plan in my head. When they came back, their home wouldn't feel like home anymore. I spent the next few days watching my parents prepare for their stolen vacation, all while pretending I had completely accepted the situation. I helped my mother pack her suitcase, listened as my father bragged about how he'd finally get to relax, and smiled through clenched teeth as they talked about all the fun they would have. Inside, I was anything but calm. They had taken something from me, something I had worked for, planned for, dreamed of. And worse, they hadn't even apologized. They thought they could just take what they wanted, that I'd roll over and accept it. They were wrong. The night before they left, I set my plan into motion. I waited until they were asleep before I got to work. First, I went into their bedroom and carefully swapped their travel documents. Instead of the resort confirmation and flight details they had printed, I replaced them with a set of fake documents I had created earlier that day. The new itinerary looked just as professional, but the destination? A completely different city, one that was cold, rainy, and the opposite of the paradise they expected. Their flight times remained the same, but once they arrived, they'd be in for a shock. Next, I moved on to their luggage. Nothing drastic, just a little mischief. My father loved his neatly packed suitcase, every item carefully folded. I made sure to shake things up a little, unfolding clothes, mismatching socks, and slipping in a few extra surprises, a small alarm clock set to go off in the middle of the night, a bottle of sunscreen filled with lotion, and my mother's favorite perfume switched with vinegar. Then, the final touch, their house. While they were gone, I would make some adjustments. Just little things at first, changing the Wi-Fi password, setting up a few unexpected visitors, a scheduled pest control visit, a fake, urgent maintenance appointment, and rearranging their furniture just enough to make them question if something was off. But the real surprise? That would come when they got home. As I lay in bed that night, I almost felt bad for what I was about to do. Almost. But then I remembered the lie. The way they had looked me in the eye and stolen my vacation without a hint of remorse. They deserved every second of what was coming. The morning of their trip, I played my part flawlessly. I helped load their bags into the car, waved goodbye with a smile, and even told them to have an amazing time. They had no idea. As I watched their car disappear down the road, a thrill of satisfaction ran through me. It was time to begin the next phase of my plan. The first order of business was making sure their vacation was as far from relaxing as possible. They had no idea that their flight would land in a cold, rainy city instead of the tropical paradise they had expected. I had checked the weather report, endless thunderstorms. Even better, their hotel reservation, thanks to some well-placed phone calls, had been cancelled. They'd show up at the front desk, exhausted from their unexpected detour, only to be told there was no room for them. By then, they'd probably start to suspect something was wrong. But that was only the beginning. Back at their house, I got to work. I had a full week to make sure that when they returned, nothing felt right anymore. First, I changed the Wi-Fi password and the security system code. The moment they tried to connect to their devices, they'd be locked out. Next, I rearranged the furniture, not in an obvious way, but just enough to make them question themselves. The couch slightly shifted, the dining table turned a few degrees, the paintings on the walls moved ever so slightly. It would create the perfect sense of unease, like something was off but they couldn't quite put their finger on it. Then, I contacted a few services in their name. A pest control company would be stopping by the day before they returned, expecting full access to the house. A cleaning service would arrive that morning, confused when no one answered the door. And best of all, I scheduled a home appraisal appointment. When they came back, they'd be greeted by a real estate agent eager to discuss the possibility of selling their home. The best prank, however, was yet to come. I had called a moving company and scheduled a small relocation service, just a few things to be moved, temporarily, to a storage unit. When my parents returned, their bedroom would be half empty, their dressers mysteriously missing, and some of their clothes neatly packed away as if they had planned a move they didn't remember. By the time they set foot in their house again, exhausted from their disastrous trip, they would feel like strangers in their own home. And the best part? I'd be waiting, with the biggest smile on my face, ready to welcome them back. The first few days of their vacation went exactly as planned. They had landed, expecting to be greeted by tropical breezes and golden sand, only to find themselves in a city drenched in rain. I imagined their faces as they realized something was terribly wrong. The frantic flipping through their fake itinerary, the hurried conversations with airline staff who had no idea why they thought they were somewhere else. Then came the hotel debacle. I had received a furious voicemail from my father on the second night. "I don't know what happened, but our reservation is gone. The hotel is fully booked, and we've been stuck in some rundown motel. We'll talk when we get back." I grinned as I listened to the message. Oh, we would definitely talk when they got back. In the meantime, I continued my work at their house. The moving company had already taken a few of their things into storage. Their bedroom looked eerily empty, just enough to make them wonder if they had forgotten something important. I had even removed some framed family photos, leaving the walls strangely bare. The pest control company had come and sprayed the house with chemicals that left behind an odd, lingering scent. The real estate agent had called twice, eager to finalize their appointment. And best of all, I had arranged for a package of random kitchen supplies to be delivered to their address, a complete mystery to them, as neither had ordered anything. By the time they returned, their world would be in complete disarray. And then, the big day arrived. I sat in the living room, sipping a cup of tea, waiting for the sound of their car pulling into the driveway. It was nearly midnight when I heard the tires screech to a stop. Then came the shouting. "What the? Why won't the garage door open?" my father yelled. "The Wi-Fi isn't working," my mother's panicked voice followed. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. The key in the front door jiggled, then stopped. I had changed the locks. A few moments later, my phone rang. I picked up on the second ring, keeping my voice calm. "Hello? What is going on?" my mother practically shrieked. "The Wi-Fi is down, the security code isn't working, and we can't even get inside our own house." I took a slow sip of tea before replying, "Oh. That's strange. Maybe you should have stayed home." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then my father growled, "Open the door. Now." I stretched, taking my time, before casually unlocking the door. As soon as it swung open, they pushed past me, their luggage dripping wet from the storm outside. Their faces were pale with exhaustion. But the worst was yet to come. My mother gasped as she stepped inside. Where is everything?" My father's eyes scanned the room, confusion turning to disbelief. "Why does it smell weird in here?" I shrugged. "Oh, you missed pest control. They had to spray while you were gone. Hope it's not too strong for you." They walked into their half-empty bedroom, their suitcases still in hand, and stopped short. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth. "Where are my clothes? Where are our dressers?" "Oh," I said casually, leaning against the doorframe. "You don't remember? You scheduled a moving service. Some of your things are in storage now." "What?" My father's voice was thick with frustration. "Why would we?" "Oh, and the real estate agent called," I added. "He's looking forward to discussing the potential sale of the house." Their jaws dropped. My mother turned to me, her face pale. This is a joke, right?" I let out a slow, satisfied smile. "You tell me. Is lying about Grandma being sick just so you could steal my vacation a joke?" The silence stretched. My father's hands clenched into fists. My mother's mouth opened and closed, as if she wanted to defend herself, but no words came. For the first time, I saw the realization sink in, the understanding of what they had done, and just how deeply they had messed up. They had taken my vacation. So I took their comfort. "Welcome home," I said, my grin widening. "I hope it was worth it." The air was thick with tension as my parents stood frozen in the middle of their half-empty bedroom, their exhausted brains struggling to process everything at once. My mother, always the first to crack under pressure, let out a shaky breath. "All right," she said, forcing an awkward laugh. "You made your point. Now, let's put everything back to normal." I folded my arms. "Oh, I don't know. I kind of like it this way." My father turned to me, his expression stormy. "Enough. You had your fun. Now undo whatever you did." I raised an eyebrow. "Like how you undid your lie about Grandma being sick?" His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "Oh, and by the way," I continued, feigning concern, "the real estate agent will be stopping by tomorrow. Maybe you should get some sleep. You've had a long trip." My mother groaned, rubbing her temples. "I can't believe this." "Oh, believe it." I gestured around the house. "Because this is exactly how I felt when I realized my vacation had been stolen from me." She opened her mouth to argue, then hesitated. For the first time, she actually looked guilty. My father, however, was still fuming. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "What do you want? An apology? Money? What will make this childish stunt stop?" I smiled, shaking my head. "I don't want your money. And I don't want an apology that you don't mean." I took a step closer, looking them both in the eye. "I just wanted you to feel what it's like to have something taken from you. Something you planned, looked forward to, and then, just gone. How does it feel?" Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between us. Finally, my mother sighed and sank onto the edge of the bed. We messed up, she admitted, her voice small. I just thought you'd be fine with it. That you wouldn't care that much. I stared at her. Why would you think that? She shrugged. You've always been independent. We just assumed you'd roll with it, like you always do. I let out a hollow laugh. So that made it okay to lie to me? She winced. No. It wasn't okay. And I see that now. I turned to my father, waiting. He met my gaze, his expression unreadable, then let out a long breath. Look. We shouldn't have done it. It was selfish. His voice was stiff, like the words physically pained him. We'll fix everything. That was as close to an apology as I was going to get from him. I nodded slowly. Good. Because you'll need to. The Wi-Fi, the security system, the moving company, you're handling all of that. My father sighed, already pulling out his phone. My mother, still looking drained, muttered, I'll call the real estate agent in the morning. I watched them, satisfied. Great. Then I guess we're done here. I turned to leave, but before I stepped out of the room, I glanced back. Oh, and one more thing, I said, smiling. Next time, maybe don't lie to your son. And with that, I walked out, leaving them to deal with the mess they had brought upon themselves. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. My parents had barely slept, probably too busy untangling the mess I had left them with. I, on the other hand, had never slept better. I wandered into the kitchen, making myself a leisurely breakfast. My mother sat at the table, staring blankly at her coffee cup, while my father was hunched over his phone, making yet another frustrated call. Yes, I understand that, but the Wi-Fi was working fine before we left, he muttered. No, I don't have the security code anymore. No, I don't know why it was changed. I smirked as I grabbed the last piece of toast, just as my mother reached for it. She glared at me, but I just took a slow, satisfying bite. Petty? Maybe. But deserved? Absolutely. The real estate agent called promptly at 9 a.m., as expected. I answered before my mother could, putting the phone on speaker. Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Callahan. The agent's voice was far too chipper for their sleep-deprived state. Just wanted to confirm our meeting today to discuss listing the house. We're not selling the house, my father snapped. A confused pause. Oh. Well, I was told you were eager to get things moving. I looked at my nails, feigning boredom. Must have been a misunderstanding. My mother rubbed her temples. We'll call you if we change our minds. Click. My father turned to me, his jaw clenched. You need to stop this now. I tilted my head. Why? Is it inconvenient? He exhaled sharply, his patience wearing thin. Yes. Oh, I said, placing a hand over my heart in mock concern. I'd hate for you to be inconvenienced. You know, like how I was when I had to cancel my vacation because you lied to me? He pinched the bridge of his nose. We already admitted we were wrong. What else do you want? I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. I want to know why you did it. The real reason. Because I don't buy that you just assumed I'd be fine with it. My parents exchanged a glance. My mother sighed. All right. You want the truth? I nodded. She hesitated, then said, we didn't think you'd use that vacation. I blinked. What? My father finally looked up from his phone. You always talk about taking time for yourself, going on trips, but you never actually do it. You make plans, then cancel them. Work always comes first for you. I frowned. That's not true. My mother gave me a knowing look. Really? When's the last time you actually went on a vacation? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I had booked trips before. Weekend getaways, plans with friends, but something always came up. An unexpected deadline. A work emergency. A reason to push it back. I had been so determined to prove that my parents were selfish, that they had robbed me of something important, but had I really been planning to go? Had they stolen my vacation? Or had they just forced me to acknowledge that I never let myself have one? The thought made my stomach turn. I wanted to be angry. I should be angry. But instead, I just felt off balance. My mother must have seen the shift in my expression, because she softened. We weren't trying to hurt you. But we also knew you wouldn't fight for it. I swallowed hard. So instead of encouraging me to actually take my trip, you lied to me and took it yourselves? She flinched. Okay, yeah, that part was terrible. Very terrible, I agreed. My father set his phone down, rubbing his face. We should have just talked to you. We see that now. For the first time since this all started, I believed them. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. You really screwed this up. We did, my mother admitted. I exhaled through my nose, thinking. Then I pushed the last bite of toast toward her. A peace offering. She blinked in surprise. Then, hesitantly, she took it. Progress. I changed the Wi-Fi password back, I muttered. Check your email. My father perked up. And the security system? I smirked. One step at a time, old man. He groaned, but I could tell he was relieved. I wasn't ready to completely forgive them yet. But maybe, just maybe, we could move forward. And next time? I was definitely taking my vacation. The next few days were an uneasy truce. My parents worked tirelessly to fix everything I had adjusted in the house, while I watched with satisfaction. They reinstated their storage items, reset their security system, and fielded awkward calls from the companies I had contacted. But there was a change in the air. A shift. For the first time in a long while, we weren't just talking, we were communicating. I could tell my mother wanted to mend things between us. She made more of an effort, asking about my plans, my work, and, even more surprisingly, if I had rescheduled my vacation. My father, always the more stubborn one, took longer to come around. But I caught him one morning, glancing at a travel website over his coffee, muttering, "You really should book something." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest thing to encouragement I'd ever get from him. And maybe, that was enough. A new beginning. 1 week later, I sat at my laptop, staring at a new booking confirmation. This time, there would be no cancellations, no last-minute excuses. I was actually going. As I packed my bags, my mother hovered at the door. "Are you sure you don't want company?" she asked, her voice light but hopeful. I smirked. "Not your company, that's for sure." She sighed dramatically. "Fair enough." Then, after a pause, she added, "I hope you have a great time." I nodded. "I will." And this time, I meant it. As I wheeled my suitcase toward the door, my father called out, "Hey." I turned to see him standing by the kitchen, arms crossed. "Bring me back a souvenir," he said, his usual gruff demeanor in place. I grinned. "Sure thing, old man." And with that, I walked out the door, not looking back. This trip wasn't just about relaxation. It was about reclaiming something I had lost, not to my parents, but to myself. And I was ready to take it back. The end.